Thank you so much. I know it's a hard time after lunch. My name is Elad from TeraSky, and now it's not working. Damn. OK. So I would like to introduce Dave. Dave is a senior DevOps engineer. You know, most of the time, he knows what he's doing. And it's great, and it's involving, not surprisingly, DevOps. But then his boss came and said to him, I have some kind of a database connection issue. Or I think my queries are getting slower. Can you help me? So at first, like every one of us, let's just open a ticket, Dave said. So what is the problem when Dave answers like this? So at first, it's causing us a slower development life cycles, because if my developers that reach my boss, Dave boss, need now to open a ticket and wait for a DBA, it's going to take time. It's also increasing the bottleneck and wait time, not just for the developer perspective, but other participants, such as FinOps, if we have a raising of database cost, and also our production system, if there is any issue in production itself. And also, it's reducing the responsiveness that us, as a DevOps engineer, are so struggling to keep on. And of course, there is another way to solve it, is by saying, OK, I will fix it. But this is also something very, very problematic, because at most times, us as a DevOps engineer, we do not have the skills of a DBA or a data engineer. So realistically, we're not going to solve it. And of course, it's also increasing our cognitive loads. We have a lot of other stuff to learn, from platform engineering, from infrastructure as well, and every other stuff. We do not want to be a DBA. This is not our role. And of course, when we try to solve it, we want to solve it ad hoc based. And of course, we're not going to think about enforcing standard and security, because I just have a ticket, I need to solve it and continue to my next task. So eventually, all of it, it's not good for us, not as a DevOps, not as a company, and of course, not as a person who is responsible for the data efforts. So if you have more complex issues, like scaling and performance, it's going to be very hard to solve it by any of these doors that we decided to open. So this makes Dave very, very frustrated. So what are we going to do now? So maybe the train already left the station. What is the data operation evolution over time? So when we began, we have a DBA. Our application was monolith, so we have a huge database. And of course, we have a DBA that manages these services, from database, optimization, cost, high availability, disaster recovery. But these days, it's more complex, because we have microservices. And when you have microservices, we also have the ability to choose our own database. And of course, if we're thinking about business-driven design, it's our responsibility, as we just spoke, it's our responsibility to manage our own databases. But again, it's getting more complex. So in another angle, the DBA role had changed to a data engineer. And when I say it shifted not for the query himself, but manage a business logic that is a part of our backend or full stack teams. And of course, backend engineers are now taking more an active step in their database. And again, they don't have the skill to do so, and they just shifting the other responsibility toward managing the database. And I think it's all sum up that it seems like is a DevOps gap. The train, our DevOps trains that we evolve over time and perfect it and continuously evolving, is not responsible for data efforts. And this is not something that we want to see. And this is what this talk is about. So nice to meet you all. My name is Elad. I'm a tech lead at TeraSky. TeraSky is a global solution integrator that we are focusing mostly in cloud-native applications. And this is something that this presentation came from a pain that we see with the customers. How are we, as the DevOps engineers, need to handle data efforts? And again, we do not going to be a DBA. This is not our role. But there is a gap that we need to fill. So I think that the first thing that we'd like to say is, why are we treating data differently from code? So I think this is the first time we realize that this is the approach that we want to pitch to solve with our customers. Why treating your data any else but another application or SaaS application, whatever project that you're building? why does a change of dictionary table, schema change, any DML, DDLs that you're doing, anything revolved to the data change is differently from the code change that we're applying CI/CD or our DevOps practices. So this is a recipe that we like to address here. So let's take them one by one and think about the challenges. So I want to ask you guys, have you ever over-provisioned database just to be safe, just because you didn't know, just to find out it's barely using? I'm sure that happened to everybody. And you know what's funny? In my last company, where a CTO, an agriculture company, we did the same thing, but sadly, even the performance was bad. So what am I doing here? So in order to solve that, we need to understand, again, as a DevOps, how our database behave. So at start, we have just one database. It usually is a baseline setup. It's handling both read and write, which is okay. But then you understand that you may have some kind of heavy writing scenario or heavy reading ones. So in this case, understand that now your topology, your architecture maybe need to be shifted from one big database to multiple database instances. That some of them will be responsible for writes, and some of them, mostly if you're starting by a very simple one, it will be one writer and multiple readers. So this is another topology that you need to understand as a DevOps. And again, this is not the only thing. When you understand that popular tables or datasets that you need to serve, some of them, if they are rarely changed or changed, let's say, once in a while, you can using your cache layer. So understanding how database workload works will be a key factor of deciding your effective provisioning strategy. And of course, when you think about database, why not think about database also going serverless? So it's great. It's great because you get automatic scaling and performance tuning. It's really simplifying the operation, but it's come with a risk, with caveats. It's got its own latency and cold start because there is no magic here. You're going to spin up some instances in your serverless pool, and when something happens and you need to handle the pressure, you're going to have some cold cases, and you need time for it to hit. And when I say hit, mean spin up more instances, because under each serverless, there are servers, there are compute that need to be spin up. And of course, in most cases, serverless databases are proprietary, and there is a vendor lock-in that you need to consider. So this is another thing that we would like you to consider. And of course, after doing so, and I know how much it's simple to say, what do you want from me? I have only one database. I will go to the AWS console, for example, just spin up a new database. This is it. No, this is not the way to go. Like every other service, let's use infrastructure as code, as you see here, defining every parameter. And again, I don't think that I need to explain why it's so important. You all know better than me. Another issue that we see is what's happened when you have a feature, amazing feature. It's done a very small change in Liquidbase, for example, if you work in Java, but it caused downtime. How are we going to handle it? This is also something that happened to us. So let's take example of this scenario. So I'm a Java developer, and again, I'm empathizing for the company, domain-driven. I have my own microservice, so I will be responsible for my database schema changes. So I'm using Liquidbase, and this is my first one. I have a table called department. I have another column that I'm adding, a very simple one. And of course, it's going to update my database. But why not shift left apply the same principle when we're talking about database? This is not shift left. This is in the middle of the development, and also it will be reflected on the database only when you spin up the application. This is really bad practice, but we're all doing it, myself as well. So let's take, for example, an open source, very famous open source, very popular, called Bytebase, taking the approach of pull request and managing everything as a code. So what you're going to see here is that I'm going to have some kind of Git repository. I have two SQLs that I manage as part of, it could be a schema change, some kind of update my dictionary files, whatever you want, everything in a database. And then it will be hooked as a webhook into your Git repository, and then it will spin up a flow. The flow will do some kind of a SQL that automatically checking your code and offer some suggestions. We're just going to speak about SQL review For example, it could be manual, it could be automatic one, but it will be on the left side of our operation, exactly after we push a change into a new pull request. And of course, we're using linters all the time for our code. Why not using also for a SQL? Here, for example, you're going to see one of them is enforcing inclusions in primary key, and also some say prohibit foreign key constraints. Okay, key constraints, most of the time, are really good to handle very complex data sets, but it makes the query much more complex because you need to do a lot of joins. Maybe as part of my company policy, I would like to forbid it. Maybe. And let's take another one. This is a query. Select all from blah, blah, blah. Okay, what is the problem? Select all, introduce performance overhead because it's ambiguous result. You're getting all the fields and you scan all the tables. So this is policies that you may want to apply. And again, if you think that I'm taking it too much into the data engineering, you may be right. When I'm saying that you have this kind of a policy, it doesn't mean that you need to decide the policy. It means that you need to facilitate. It means that you need to show to your, not DBA, but for your backend developers, what they can use. It doesn't mean that you need to magically be a data engineer overnight. We just need to facilitate. This is my approach. And of course, we need, as any other software delivery, we need to find a balance between fast release and environment stability. So Bytebase showing this, this one that I really like. So for example, add a table in a test environment. This could be assessed as a low risk, and then it could be automatically approved by, again, any project. It can be Bytebase, it can be any other one. This is just the approach. But when you create table in production, then it's maybe a moderate, and you need some kind of approval by a project owner, a manual approval, okay, not just your automatic test. But if you alter in table in production, or the plan, you detect that the plan is going to affect more than 100 rows, this may be marked, classified as a high risk. And here you maybe need 2 approvers to make sure it's okay. And this is how maybe, if you're okay with it, find the balance between liquidity of software development and still make our environment safe on productions. So again, just to summarize, you see there is a change. I can see what's happened here. I can see it here in the interface, but I can see it also as a Git change as part of my revisions. Then I see automatic chase and manual test that already checked my SQL code. And of course, I can do automatic rollout or manual rollout. I want to discuss about something else. This is a very simple SQL query. It's not a query, it's a DML. It's creating a user on the database with a username and a password. What's the problematic here? The main problem here is use the principle of least privilege. I cannot tell you how many times when I ask company about how they provision users in the database, they just do this. So at least my tip, create the user, then perform the following. Decide on the operation level, select, update, and other DML operations that you want, on specific database, for a specific user, and of course, don't forget to flash privilege so it will be automatically updated in your database. So this is the minimal thing that us for DevOps need to tell our company to do. Another thing is, let's go back into the same query. What's the problem here? The problem is now is in the password. Yes, you're absolutely, okay, great. I think this is go back to the checking your code and empathizing how much important to go with testing, so you're absolutely right. This table will not work, but I'm managing passwords. Is it okay? Is it not okay? So static password, so I'm missing automatic rotation, password rotation. There are long-living credentials that can be potentially be exposed. And again, funny things, people are still hard-coding credentials. Or if you want to give your developer an access to an environment, okay, just give him the password. It's not okay. There is no tracking, central tracking about who and when. And of course, if you want to evoke it, it's more problematic. So eventually, this is also a pattern that we see. And again, why not using dynamic secrets? And this is an example from Vault, but it could be like any other project that you select. You have your application or CI/CD will require a database credential. Then your database, it could be Postgres, but any other database that your solution provides as database connectivity. In this case, Vault will create a user in the database and returns a user and a password to the application. And then, only then, temporarily, the application will log into the database and use the credentials that was provided by Vault. So this is another pattern that we see with the company. And again, like any other software that we're managing, our database should be the same. Another thing is about, let's take, okay, because I work with Java a lot of time, but no, guys, this is old-fashioned, but let's talk about TypeScript, Node.js. So I'm working on my backend application. It's TypeScript. I'm using a very famous ORM called Prisma. And I want to write this query. So I have some kind of a const, waiting an ASCII call, wait for an ASCII corp. Prisma user find menu where name is John, include orders. So there is some kind of a join. But again, this is a code. This is not my SQL. So my problem, I want to ask two things. One of them, do I even care about my SQL code? Or it's just like behind the scene and it's not relevant for me? No, I want to get my SQL code in multiple reasons. But my tip here is to be able to enable the database audit event logs. And this is from RDS. You can see that if you go scrolling into very, very rare option group settings, you're going to see that you have some kind of parameter called server audit events, what I'm seeing here when the screen is here also. And you can have your allowed values of everything that the database itself will log into S3, and then it will be exposed for you to analyze it later. And it will look like this. So, in my example, user 1 was connected into the database cell. Then you see what Prisma behind the scene created the SQL. And again, this is not maybe relevant for you, but this is important for you to facilitate for your developers because you want to see why the query was slow. And of course, you're going to see the disconnect. It's important for us. It's important for security reason. It could be important for FinOps reason. It could be auditing. It could be anything. But again, simply just for your developer to understand what's happened behind the scene as part of his debugging. What comes into your minds when you see this query, which has multiple joins? I think, again, for most of us, yeah. This should be, OK, I have a lot of problems. This is not mine. And you're absolutely right. But again, it's not a problem. It's not so, sorry, it's not, I didn't read into this SQL code. But again, for me to facilitate the solution, I need to provide some kind of metrics and KPI for our users, for our database administrators that you need to check. One of them is the response time. How much time it took from running the query to get a response. The second one is database throughput. How much my database can handle over time in seconds, and is it change over time? Is there any patterns that, for example, my database can handle now 1,000 queries per second, something happened and now it only can be able 100 queries. And this is something that I need to address. And again, to address, tell someone else, but at least be able to expose it to the users. How many open connections I can handle over time? Because again, open connections, this is something which is also consuming time from our databases. And of course, warnings and errors and frequent access. So my first tip here, do not try to reinvent the wheel. All of the cloud providers have amazing tools that we can cite and see queries. This is from Azure. You can see a very complex query, and I can see information about how it was running, statistics, how is it running under the last 24 hours. So again, try to not reinvent the wheel. You have the information. But for example, and it's totally OK, if we are not using a managed database, for example, if you're using Postgres, there is this extension, amazing extension called pgstat statements. By a very simple SQL query, SQL statement, you could just run it, and it will handle your statistics. And this is a very simple query. This query, what it's taking? It's taking the role and the PG state assessment, doing a join, and then it's asking for 5 top queries that took more than 500 milliseconds, more than half a second, don't using the case, they're really trying to get the data from the database and giving me the total ones, the top 5 of them. And again, this is only a way for you to facilitate the information for the relevant party. It could be the DBA, database administrator, it could be your developer. So us also just facilitating the information. And of course, so we discussed about, for example, let's provision an RDS database. We discussed about RDS log. We created logs, so we have some kind of auditing of a database. Then we connected CloudWatch, and then maybe you have an SNS to push this message forward. But if eventually this is my message for my users, for database insights, there is high CPU alert, CPU is over 60%. It's not going to work. This is not what we mean an insightful notification. So keep in mind, so when you're focusing about all the things that we just spoke, the last mile is also important. We need to have an insightful insight. And this is an example for one. So I have the alert name, long-running query, SQL query in the production database. I have the condition. I explain to the one that I'm sending this message is the query execution time was more than 5 seconds, and it's happened at least for 10 queries in the last 15 minutes. I understand what's happened. And then I give you details. What's the table, what's the table scan if you have this information or not. In most cases, you do have this information. It's really binary yes or no. And also the query ID. And of course, if you want to really help them, even give them some kind of hints where you think the problem could be. Just to try to summarize, there is no magic here, okay? We will not, by a night, will be a DBA. This is not our role. We don't want, I think most of us do not want to do it. But I think there is a gap. For many years, we decided for someone else to do it. And the data team were isolated, some kind of out of R&D maybe, out of IT, out of development. But it's changing. It's changing because we see data everywhere. Every project, every business, every domain-driven that has its own database. And it's something that for us as a DevOps engineer, we need to handle as well. And I think this makes Dave happy, I think. Let's see. And one thing before I will conclude. We are spending so much time in making Kubernetes our de facto compute, storage, and memory platform. Why not leverage also to actually running a database instance in production? This is something that I will also speak in KubeCon in the Data on Kubernetes session. And again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope it was helpful in any way. Thank you so much.